The deadliest conflict in human history began not with a single gunshot, but with a failed artist's twisted vision of racial superiority. A man, rejected from art school, would go on to orchestrate the systematic murder of millions and plunge the entire world into 6 years of unprecedented destruction. This is the story of how World War II truly began. Not in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, but years earlier in the political chaos of a defeated nation desperate for someone to blame. Welcome to part 1 of the comprehensive documentary series on World War II. I'm going to take you on a journey through the most pivotal years in modern history, from the ashes of World War I to the moment that would force America to abandon its isolationist stance forever. By the end of this series, you'll understand exactly how a localized European conflict transformed into a global war that would reshape civilization itself. It's November 1918. The guns have finally fallen silent after 4 years of mechanized slaughter. Empires have collapsed. Millions are dead. And in a small hospital in Germany, a temporarily blinded corporal named Adolf Hitler is experiencing what he would later call the most harrowing moment of his life, learning that Germany has surrendered. This moment of personal devastation would soon become the world's nightmare. The seeds of World War II were planted in the very treaty that ended World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, wasn't just a peace agreement. It was a document of humiliation, designed to ensure that Germany could never again threaten European stability. But like so many well-intentioned plans in history, it achieved exactly the opposite of what it set out to do. Under the treaty's terms, Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for the war, pay crushing reparations totaling 132 billion gold marks, equivalent to roughly $300 billion today, surrender territory to France, Belgium, Denmark, and Poland, limit its military to just 100,000 men, and completely demilitarize the Rhineland. The once proud German Empire was carved up, economically strangled, and internationally humiliated. This is where our story truly begins, because desperate people in desperate times make desperate choices. The Germany of the early 1920s was a powder keg of resentment, economic collapse, and political instability. Hyperinflation was so severe that people needed wheelbarrows full of cash to buy bread. The middle class saw their life savings evaporate overnight. Into this chaos stepped a variety of extremist movements, but none more dangerous than a small political party called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazis. Adolf Hitler, the failed artist turned political agitator, joined this party in 1919 and quickly discovered he had a terrifying gift for public speaking. His message was simple, but deadly effective. Germany hadn't really lost World War I. It had been stabbed in the back by Jews, communists, and traitors. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't justice. It was a Jewish conspiracy to destroy the German people. And only through racial purity and military strength could Germany reclaim its rightful place as the master of Europe. Now, you might be wondering how someone with such obviously extreme views could gain power in a modern, educated nation. This is one of the most important lessons of the 20th century. Democracy is fragile, and it can be destroyed from within using democratic means. The Nazi rise to power wasn't sudden. It was a gradual process that took advantage of every economic crisis, every political failure, every moment of national uncertainty. When the global economic depression hit in 1929, unemployment in Germany soared to over 6 million people. The democratic Weimar Republic seemed incapable of solving the crisis, and extremist parties on both the left and right gained support. In the election of July 1932, the Nazis became the largest party in the German parliament, winning 37.3% of the vote. Hitler demanded to be made chancellor, but President Hindenburg initially refused, reportedly saying he wouldn't make that Austrian corporal chancellor of Germany. But political maneuvering, backroom deals, and the naive belief that Hitler could be controlled and used led to his appointment as Chancellor on January 30th, 1933. This was the moment the world changed forever, though few people realized it at the time. Within months, Hitler had consolidated power, eliminated political opposition, and begun implementing his radical agenda. The Enabling Act of March 23, 1933, gave Hitler the power to pass laws without parliamentary consent. Democracy in Germany was effectively dead, but Hitler's ambitions extended far beyond Germany's borders. His ultimate goal was the creation of a vast German empire in Eastern Europe, achieved through conquest and the enslavement or extermination of what he considered inferior races. This wasn't secret. He had laid out his plans in his book Mein Kampf, published in 1925. The problem was that most world leaders either didn't take him seriously or believed they could appease his ambitions with minor concessions. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another militaristic power was pursuing its own imperial ambitions. Japan had been rapidly modernizing since the 1860s and had already proven its military capabilities by defeating Russia in 1905. But the global depression hit Japan particularly hard, and military leaders began to argue that only through conquest could Japan secure the resources it needed to survive. On September 18, 1931, Japanese forces staged a false flag operation near the city of Mukden in Manchuria, then used this as a pretext to occupy all of Manchuria. This was arguably the first act of aggression that led to World War II, though the world didn't recognize it as such at the time. The League of Nations condemned Japan's actions, but took no meaningful action to stop them. This weak response sent a clear message to other potential aggressors. The international community lacked the will to enforce its own rules. Hitler was paying close attention to this lesson. In 1933, both Germany and Japan withdrew from the League of Nations, signaling their intention to pursue unilateral action regardless of international opinion. The stage was being set for a global confrontation, but most democratic nations were still focused on their own economic problems and had little appetite for another war just 15 years after the last one had ended. Hitler's first major test of international resolve came in March 1936, when German forces reoccupied the Rhineland in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. This was an enormous gamble. Germany's military was still relatively weak, and if France had responded with force, Hitler later admitted that German forces would have been forced to withdraw with their tails between their legs. But France didn't act. Neither did Britain. The remilitarization of the Rhineland was allowed to stand, and Hitler learned another crucial lesson. The Western democracies would not fight to enforce the post-war settlement. This emboldened him to take even greater risks. The next crisis came in Austria. Despite being forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler had always intended to unite Austria with Germany in what he called the Anschluss, or connection. Austrian Nazis had been working to destabilize their government for years, and in March 1938, Hitler simply sent German troops across the border. They were greeted not with resistance, but with cheering crowds throwing flowers. The international response was the same as before: condemnation without action. The Western powers were beginning to recognize that they were dealing with a fundamentally different kind of leader, but they still believed that his ambitions could be satisfied through negotiation. This belief was put to its ultimate test during the Sudetenland crisis of 1938. The Sudetenland was a region of Czechoslovakia with a large German-speaking population, and Hitler demanded that it be transferred to Germany. Unlike Austria, Czechoslovakia was a genuine democracy with a modern military and alliance commitments from France and the Soviet Union. This should have been the line in the sand. Instead, it became the most infamous example of appeasement in history. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany 3 times to negotiate with Hitler. The result was the Munich Agreement of September 30th, 1938, which gave Hitler everything he wanted without a shot being fired. Chamberlain returned to London declaring he had achieved peace for our time, but there was no peace. Within 6 months, German forces occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia, proving that Hitler's promises were worthless and his ambitions unlimited. Even Chamberlain was finally forced to recognize that appeasement had failed catastrophically. When Hitler next turned his attention to Poland, demanding the return of the port city of Danzig and the creation of an extraterritorial highway through the Polish corridor, Britain and France finally drew a line. They guaranteed Poland's independence and made clear that any German attack would mean war. Hitler didn't believe them. He thought the Western democracies were too weak and divided to fight. To ensure that he wouldn't face a two-front war, he made one of the most cynical deals in history, the Nazi-Soviet Pact of August 23, 1939. This non-aggression agreement between fascist Germany and communist Russia shocked the world and included secret protocols dividing Poland between the two powers. On September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed the Polish border in what Hitler called a defensive action. The Wehrmacht's new style of warfare, which would become known as Blitzkrieg or Lightning War, combined tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry in coordinated attacks that shattered traditional defensive lines. Polish forces, despite fighting bravely, were simply overwhelmed by the speed and coordination of the German assault. Britain and France honored their guarantee to Poland, declaring war on Germany on September 3, 1939. World War II had officially begun, but this declaration of war was largely symbolic. Neither country launched any meaningful offensive to help Poland. The period from September 1939 to May 1940 became known as the Phony War, because there was so little actual fighting on the Western Front. Poland fought alone and was crushed between the German invasion from the west and the Soviet invasion from the east on September 17th. Warsaw fell on September 27th, and by October 6th, the last Polish forces had surrendered. Poland was divided between Germany and the Soviet Union, exactly as Hitler and Stalin had secretly agreed. But Hitler's ambitions were far from satisfied. While the Western Front remained quiet, he was already planning his next moves. The period of the Phony War gave Germany time to prepare for the campaigns that would follow, while the democracies largely wasted this opportunity to build up their own forces or develop effective strategies. The quiet was broken in April 1940, when Germany launched Operation Weserübung, the simultaneous invasion of Denmark and Norway. Denmark fell in just 6 hours, the shortest military campaign in history. Norway held out longer, aided by British and French forces, but by June 10th, all resistance had ended. Germany now controlled the entire Scandinavian peninsula and had secured its access to Swedish iron ore, crucial for its war machine. The real test came on May 10th, 1940, when German forces launched their offensive against France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. What followed was one of the most stunning military victories in history. Using the same blitzkrieg tactics that had crushed Poland, German armored divisions punched through the supposedly impregnable Ardennes forest and encircled the majority of French and British forces in Belgium. The Netherlands surrendered on May 15th after the devastating bombing of Rotterdam. Belgium fell on May 28th. Most shocking of all, France, the great military power of Europe, the nation that had held off Germany for 4 years in World War I, collapsed in just 6 weeks. Paris fell on June 14th, and on June 22nd, France signed an armistice that left the northern half of the country under direct German occupation. The speed of France's defeat stunned the world. In just 10 months, Hitler had conquered Poland, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. Only Britain remained to continue the fight, and many observers believed it was only a matter of time before Britain, too, would be forced to seek terms. But Britain had a secret weapon, a new Prime Minister named Winston Churchill, who had replaced the discredited Neville Chamberlain on the very day Germany attacked France. Churchill's response to Hitler's seemingly unstoppable victories was defiant. "We shall never surrender.
We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender."